DSpace administration part 2. To give a general idea, in the part 1 we have dealt with the DSpace, how the collection is organized, that is how the entire content is organized in DSpace. In part 2 we will be dealing with the who are the users, that means the people associated with DSpace. In the third one we will be dealing with the workflow process, that is the process of DSpace, that is how a digital document moves from submission stage to appearing on the digital repository. So, this is we are going to deal with all the people who are associated with digital repository. Now, the kinds of users. So, if we want to classify the users, there are general users, DSpace calls them as anonymous users. That means these users are just casual users of DSpace. They do not want to really get associated with any of the activities of DSpace, but they would just use DSpace, perhaps make searches or browse the contents, then maybe they download some of the contents, but they do not want to be play any role other than just visiting DSpace digital repository. Then we have members, just as in the case of the library. Please recall, I think in the earlier part 1 of administration, I dealt with I asked people to imagine digital repository on the lines of a traditional repository. Just as traditional repository has members, even a digital library can have members. In case of a traditional repository, once somebody becomes a member, they can borrow an item, a document, and perhaps may return that. But we know in the electronic form, any number of people can access the same document. So, here borrowing and returning a document does not come into picture, but again these members can play other roles. In fact, membership is a prerequisite to play any role other than the just a casual user of a DSpace. Then subscribers. Once you are a member, you can be a subscriber to a digital collection. That means whenever if you are interested in some kind of any updates regarding a particular collection, you can subscribe to that collection, so that if anything is added, you get a reminder, an email alert saying that so and so item is added to the collection. Then you have authors who are submitters, then who are willing to submit their collection, and rather who does the self archiving of their publication or a digital item. Then reviewers. Reviewers, these are the people who ensure quality and see whether a particular item submitted to the digital collection is worth to be retained, or whether it should be reviewed, or whether it should be modified. All these decisions are taken by the reviewers. Then metadata people. Normally in case of self archiving, the author, in addition to uploading his document, he may enter some metadata about the document, that is describing the document attributes. So, probably if he has committed some mistakes while entering metadata, it could be typographical or any other kind of mistakes, the metadata editors will take care of that, so that the quality of the digital repository is ensured. Then of course, the administrator, that means in the earlier part 1, we mostly dealt with what an administrator can do with regard to the organization of content. In this presentation, we will deal with what an administrator can do with regard to subscribers, authors, and reviewers and metadata editors. So, general users. Now, we will go a little more into detail of each of those users. So, Anybody can be a general user, also called anonymous user. He can search, access, download the digital resources available with the repository. One of the greatest advantages of DSpace is the moment a document is uploaded, immediately it is indexed. So, just as in case of some other repository software, you do not have to rebuild the collection, re-index the collection, because the Lucene search engine is an incremental indexing system it has. So, that means the moment it is uploaded, it is immediately searchable. I mean, it immediately gets indexed and it immediately get this one. Normally, many repositories, especially those who believe in open access movement, they make anybody to be able to access, browse and download the documents. However, I know some instances of digital repositories, they insist one should be a member, then only they are allowed to make a search, which is not a very good, which does not go with the philosophy of open access movement. But again, they have, even if you become a member, only certain users are allowed to access certain documents, some are allowed to another group of members. For example, in a highly classified laboratory, probably a group of people dealing with a particular topic, only that group of scientists can access the digital documents in a particular collection dealing with their subject. The others are not allowed to visit other collections. This kind of restrictions can be created by the administrator, but again it goes against the open access philosophy. A good open access repository should allow anonymous users to search, access, download any document from the repository. That is where the so called freedom comes into picture. Okay. So, members. So, membership is the minimum requirement to play any role as a reviewer, as a metadata editor or in a collection administrator. So, membership is the minimum thing. Anybody normally can become a member. Usually, member should only prevail in DSpace context, he only should supply email address of him, because it is the email, through email the system is in touch with the members. Okay. Whether he is a reviewer or whatever it is, DSpace keeps sending email alerts. Here please remember, DSpace does not receive any mails as such. If you want to address anything regarding you want to comment, there is a feedback mechanism, and which is directed to a particular administrator or somebody who is responsible to answer that, but there the feedback mechanism will have the address of the person who is responding, but as such DSpace does not have a system to receive, it only keeps sending the mails to the people. That is why to become a member, email address is essential. Of course, member can create his own password, or in some cases he wants to change the password, he can, he should give his full name, last name, first name, like that. And there are other details in the membership form which are something like phone number of the user and other things which are optional. In fact, if anybody wishes to become a member, just the name and email address is good enough. Perhaps many people prefer it for privacy reasons, not to give too much information to the DSpace administrators. So, one should be a member. To become a member, okay, one can subscribe, or once you become a member, the member can subscribe to the collection, or he can become a submitter, or he can become a reviewer or a metadata editor. This is essential for the simple reason that what a subscriber means is, he is if somebody wants to subscribe to a particular collection, say for example, a thesis collection, a member wants to be a subscriber. So, whenever new thesis is added, the person who subscribed to that collection will get an email alert saying so and so thesis by name, the title of the thesis is this and it was submitted by so and so. If you are interested, please click the following URL. So, that is the role of that is the advantage of becoming a subscriber. So, we deal with the subscriber more in detail. One should first be a member to subscribe to any collection, because through only by, if somebody becomes a member, the system knows his email, okay, to alert him that something is added to a particular collection he is subscribing. A member can be a subscriber to many collections, okay, as many as he wishes. Remember, normally subscription is based on a collection, collection wise. That means normally one does not subscribe to a community, he subscribes to a collection. If a digital repository has about 20 collections, he can always say that okay, I am interested in these 4 or 5 collections, not in the rest of the 16 collections. So, he can mention in which collection he would like to subscribe. In other words, for any additions to these 4 collections, I need to get an email alert, because I am interested in these collections, I am not interested in the rest of the collections. Okay. So, whenever a digital library, any item is added to any of the collections he is subscribing, immediately he gets an alert, email alert. Normally, this email alert is taken care of by a cron job. Okay. In DSpace administrator, in the case of Unix systems, there are certain jobs called cron jobs. These jobs, the advantage with this is you can fix the timing of a particular program to be invoked and run at a particular time. Normally, cron jobs are run in the night time where the traffic would be less. But again, in case of a global repository, probably timings have less relevance, for the simple reason that many people may be accessing, we think overnight, but it could be daytime in the US. But in any case, cron jobs, there are many scores of cron jobs in DSpace. So, one of the cron jobs, for example, I have fixed 12 o'clock to send email alerts to the subscribers. So, night at 12 o'clock, the DSpace looks into each collection and who are the subscribers to it. Whenever an item is added to that particular collection, immediately it identifies the subscribers and sends email alert informing, in this collection so and so item is added, please look into that. If you are interested, click the following URL. So, for each collection, DSpace takes care of through a cron job. That means, whenever something is added, DSpace does not send email immediately. Only in the nights, whenever the cron job is fixed, that time only DSpace sends email alerts to the subscribers of a collection. Now, authors or submitters. Of course, in the self-archiving situation, these people are called authors, but DSpace calls them as submitters. That means, whoever submits a digital item to a particular collection. Okay. If a member wishes to submit his digital object or item to one or more collections, he should get permission from the DSpace administrator. Though to become normally a member, DSpace does not insist that whether administrator should accept or reject membership. Normally, by default, anybody can become a member. It does not really pose any restrictions on becoming a member. But however, to become a submitter, the person whoever is interested in self archiving his digital objects should write a separate email. I mean, it has nothing to do with DSpace. That is a regular email to the administrator saying that I have a few publications or few digital objects I wish to submit to so and so collection. Then if the authenticity of the publisher, I mean the submitter is satisfied by the DSpace administrator, he may allow him to submit to a collection. Please remember, DSpace administrator allows authors or submitters to submit to a particular collection, not to the entire repository or not even entire community. This is important for the simple reason, perhaps say for example, I am an expert in library and information science, or I have a few publications written by me which are have no copyright hassles. I would like to submit to the digital repository. Probably administrator may allow me to submit to a collection under library and information science rather than in Sanskrit. For example, I have no background in Sanskrit, but mischievously I may submit something to a Sanskrit collection where it goes to the reviewers and waste their time. So, to ensure such mishaps not to happen, DSpace administrator has to give permission to certain collections. Perhaps if somebody is an expert in more than one collection or more than one subject or something like that, probably administrator may allow a particular submitter to submit to more than one collection. So, there is no restriction about it. So, that means a submitter can submit to a collection only if he is authorized to do so with that collection. Okay. Normally, whenever he submits, a DSpace shows on the screen that your collection, your submission is under process. So, soon you may hear from the reviewers about its acceptance or rejections or modifications. So, that is what actually DSpace does whenever an item is submitted. Now, reviewers. Normally, reviewers are subject specialists. So, in case of repositories of academic organizations, probably the department senior staff may be identified as reviewers. In any case, even the reviewers should become members, because how do they know that a particular collection had received a submission from an author and they are supposed to review it. That means, to have that information received from DSpace, they should become members before becoming reviewers. So, it is the administrator who identifies who should be the reviewers. Perhaps he may identify some of the subject experts dealing with the particular collection and request them the task of reviewing. Okay. Reviewers are of so obviously reviewers are of a collection are identified by the administrator. Whenever a digital object is submitted, DSpace generates an email alert to all the reviewers of a collection. So, for example, if the administrator has identified there are 6 reviewers for a particular collection. So, whenever a submitter submits his item, all the 6 reviewers get the email alert saying that an item has been submitted by so and so with the title so and so. So, one of the reviewers can take up the job of reviewing. This is slightly different from that of a journal. In case of journal articles, probably the journal may have a reviewing policy saying that unless 2 reviewers out of 3 accept the publication, it will be rejected. That means, it expects more than one person to review the process and accept it, or sometimes they may say no, you modify it. If one of the problem with DSpace was, if one of the reviewers of a collection takes up the job of reviewing, the rest of the 5 reviewers will not have a chance to review the article. This is a tricky affair and different from that of a journal. In case of a journal, all the 6 reviewers can open. 3 of them, if they accept, probably journal policy is at least 3 of them should accept. But here that is not the case. In DSpace, of the 6 reviewers, if one of them accepts or rejects, the rest of the reviewers will not have a chance to do any job on that. So, a reviewer normally he can accept or reject or ask for modifications of the submission, giving the reasons either for modification or for rejection. So, metadata validators, these people are important. Mostly these are library and information science people who are well versed with cataloging. Okay. Again, as in the case of reviewers, the administrator has to identify who should be the metadata validators. Okay. So, obviously the metadata validators also should be members of the digital repository, so that whenever a reviewing process approves a particular publication, immediately the DSpace system sends email alerts to metadata validators saying that so and so article was already reviewed and accepted, please correct the metadata. Okay. So that the metadata people can modify some of the mistakes in the metadata. Okay. He can check and modify whether the author has properly entered the Dublin core metadata elements. After all, though the Dublin core was designed to be entered by non-catalogers, that means non-specialists of library and information science, still and Dublin core is meant for self-archiving by authors. So, it was kept fairly simple, so that any author can enter the metadata. But again, still, for example, the choice of subject elements, if it is a medical repository, probably the administrator prefers the mesh subject headings to be chosen rather than free text medical terms of the choice of the end user, or probably he might have the author might have mistaken with the last name and first name of the author, because after all the rendering author's names is a complex affair, which the librarians are generally taught how to identify last name and first name. But remember, in any case, metadata people cannot reject an item, because after all they are not subject experts. They can only modify the metadata or correct the metadata in that sense. So, it is the question of the correcting the metadata values rather than making a decision about whether it is a good article or a bad article. So, in general, e-people, DSpace considers, considers all the members, reviewers, metadata people, everybody as e-people. Optionally, administrator or collection admin can group the e-people into various e-groups. E-people can be associated with any collection as submitters and reviewers. So, e-groups, the DSpace administrator identify, for example, there are a set of anthropologists. You can you can create an e-group of anthropologists and assign the job of reviewing for all the collections dealing with anthropology. That is the purpose of grouping, so that instead of each individual is given authentication, a group of anthropologists can be given authentication permissions. Collection administrators is a relatively less used phenomena. That means, in case of a large digital repository, the administrator can relegate the duties of each collection and each collection administrator is responsible to identify reviewers, metadata editors of a particular collection. This is only just a division of labor by the administrator. So, administrator, he is the ultimate man, Mr. Noal of Omniscient, and a superman. He can make the system very powerful or make it beautiful or ugly, and it is a dangerous task. After all, he can create or destroy anything in the digital repository. So, he is the one who creates communities, sub-communities, creates collections under each community, administration of e-people, creating e-groups, authorizing e-groups, everything is the responsibility of the administrators. So, authorization can be at community level, collection level and item level. So, he can create restrictions of access at various levels so that the end users who are permitted for what. He can modify Dublin core metadata elements, but any modification is going away from the standard. He can customize the DSpace screens, then he can customize the email alerts and change the language, and he can choose the license which is more suitable for his digital repository. So, administrator job is the most important task in DSpace. He can relegate collections related to the collection administrator. Learning DSpace is all about learning to be an administrator. So, it is the administration that is utmost importance. The job of administrator is the most important task in the creation and maintenance of a digital repository. With that, we conclude.